Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. Now, take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's drift into a peaceful slumber together. This time I will tell you about Cinderella, journey to eternal happiness. Cinderella, born into a loving family, was once a symbol of joy and innocence in a small, picturesque village. The house she grew up in, nestled among lush green fields and surrounded by towering trees, was a home filled with warmth, laughter, and love. The atmosphere was one of contentment, where family bonds were cherished above all else. Her parents, a kind-hearted merchant and a gentle woman, doted on their daughter, making sure she was never without the care and attention she deserved. From an early age, Cinderella's parents recognized that their daughter was not only beautiful in appearance but also in heart. She had a natural kindness that radiated from her, and this made her beloved by everyone who knew her. The villagers often spoke of her gentle nature and the way she always offered a smile to everyone, no matter their circumstances. Her laughter was contagious, and her presence could brighten anyone's day. She spent her days playing in the fields, running barefoot through the meadows, and dancing in the sun. The love and care her parents showed her were the foundation of her happiness, and every corner of her home was filled with memories of joyous moments spent together. Whether it was helping her mother bake bread, tending to the small garden behind their house, or listening to her father's stories by the fireplace, Cinderella had a childhood that many would envy. Her parents' love for each other also created a nurturing environment in which Cinderella felt secure and valued. Her father, a humble merchant, worked hard to provide for his family. Though his job required him to travel frequently, he always made sure to return with small tokens for Cinderella, a ribbon for her hair, a new doll, or some exotic spice to add to the evening meal. Her mother, equally devoted, taught her about kindness, grace, and the value of hard work. She would spend hours with Cinderella, teaching her how to sew, how to maintain the house, and how to respect nature. The love in Cinderella's home was palpable, and it was clear that her parents had built a strong, supportive relationship. They were partners in every sense, working together to make sure their daughter had everything she needed to grow into a confident and compassionate young woman. They encouraged her dreams, allowed her to explore the world around her, and always made sure she felt loved and cherished. Cinderella's family was well respected in the village, not because of their wealth or status, but because of the kindness they showed others. They were known for their generosity, always ready to lend a helping hand to those in need. Whenever there was a celebration in the village, Cinderella and her parents would host a gathering, welcoming neighbors and friends into their home with open arms. It was this spirit of community and togetherness that made their home a beacon of happiness. Cinderella's bond with her parents was unbreakable. Her father would often tell her that she was the light of his life, and her mother would kiss her forehead, whispering that she was the greatest treasure she could ever have. She believed these words with all her heart, and she grew up feeling secure, loved, and deeply connected to her family. As Cinderella grew older, her beauty also blossomed. She inherited her mother's striking features: soft, golden hair, delicate features, and warm, expressive eyes. Her beauty was more than skin deep, however, it was her kind heart and gentle soul that made her truly remarkable. People often remarked that Cinderella was not only beautiful on the outside, but that her beauty shone even brighter from within. Her days continued in peaceful bliss, and she had no inkling of the storm that was about to engulf her life. Despite the sometimes challenging nature of their humble lifestyle, Cinderella was content. She never wished for anything more than what she already had because everything she needed, love, family, and peace, was right there with her. The days seemed to stretch on forever in the warmth of her home, and each day brought its own simple joys. Cinderella's parents, too, were content in their own way. Though they had their own challenges, particularly with the demands of running a household and caring for their daughter, they found immense joy in each other's company. Their love was unwavering, and they worked together to ensure that their family remained strong. The little things they did for one another, the quiet moments of support, were what kept their family grounded and happy. There were days when Cinderella's father would take her on walks through the countryside, showing her the beauty of the land and teaching her about the world beyond their village. He would point to the distant mountains and tell her stories of faraway lands. On these walks, Cinderella would ask questions about the world, and her father would answer patiently, nurturing her curiosity and wonder. Her mother, on the other hand, spent hours nurturing Cinderella's spirit. She would teach her to dance in the garden, spinning beneath the large oak tree that stood tall and proud in the center of their yard. The tree was a symbol of their family's resilience and love. It was under this tree that Cinderella and her mother would sit, sharing stories and dreams for the future. Her mother's teachings instilled in Cinderella a deep appreciation for beauty, kindness, and the simple joys of life. Cinderella's childhood, filled with laughter and love, was everything a young girl could wish for. The days were long, the nights peaceful, and every moment spent with her family was a treasure. The village that surrounded her was full of life and spirit, and Cinderella felt a deep connection to it. She would often help the villagers, running errands for the elderly or assisting at the market with small tasks. Her kindness was well known, and it was said that anyone who crossed her path could not help but feel a sense of warmth and comfort. Despite the simplicity of their life, Cinderella's family was happy. They were not concerned with riches or material wealth because they had what mattered most: love, companionship, and the security of knowing they could rely on one another. Cinderella's parents often spoke of the importance of family, and Cinderella, in turn, absorbed those lessons, making them her guiding principles. But even in the midst of this happiness, there was always an underlying sense of transience. Time passed quickly, and Cinderella's parents knew that their daughter would not be a child forever. They saw in her a bright future and worked hard to ensure she would be ready for the challenges that would eventually come. They prepared her for life with love, teaching her the values that would guide her through whatever came her way. It was in this peaceful, loving environment that Cinderella spent her formative years. She had no reason to suspect that her life would soon take a dramatic turn. Everything about her world seemed perfect, and she was the happiest she had ever been. Little did she know that fate had something different in store for her. Cinderella's life, once filled with nothing but joy, laughter, and warmth, took a sudden and heartbreaking turn the day her mother fell ill. It was a day like any other when Cinderella's mother first showed signs of fatigue, something subtle at first, like an extra nap or a soft cough. But over the course of days, her condition worsened. What had seemed like a minor illness gradually became a deep and unrelenting affliction that would rob Cinderella of her most beloved parent. For Cinderella, the change in her mother's health was like a cloud descending over her sunny world. Her mother, who had always been the pillar of love, comfort, and support in the family, now spent more and more time in bed. Her once vibrant spirit began to fade, replaced by a weariness that left her unable to perform the simplest tasks she once handled so easily. It was as if the light that had filled the house was slowly dimming, and no matter how hard Cinderella tried, she couldn't seem to bring back the energy that once filled their home. Cinderella's father, too, was deeply affected by his wife's illness. He did everything he could to care for her, bringing in doctors from neighboring villages, trying every possible remedy to ease her pain. But despite their best efforts, her condition continued to decline. The village healer, a wise old woman who had helped many in the past, could offer no further advice. She gently explained to Cinderella's father that there was little that could be done. The illness was far beyond their control. It was a sorrowful truth, one that left Cinderella's father broken and powerless. Cinderella herself, though devastated, tried her best to be strong for her mother and father. She became the one who helped tend to her mother's needs, sitting by her bedside, offering comfort and whispering words of love and encouragement. In her own quiet way, Cinderella sought to ease her mother's suffering, though she knew there was nothing she could do to reverse the inevitable. The sadness that filled their home was palpable, and each passing day felt heavier than the last. The moments of laughter and joy that had once filled their house seemed like distant memories. Cinderella's mother, weakened and frail, often spoke of the love she had for her daughter, giving her advice on how to live a life full of kindness and grace. She encouraged Cinderella to remain strong and to continue living a life filled with goodness, no matter the challenges that would surely come in the future. Her words, though heartfelt, were also filled with a sense of resignation, for her time was quickly running out. There was one particular evening when Cinderella's mother called her close. She held Cinderella's hands tightly, gazing into her eyes with a deep and knowing expression. In a soft, fragile voice, she told Cinderella that life was often unpredictable, and that although she would not be there to watch over her, she trusted that her daughter would grow to be a woman of great strength, kindness, and love. She kissed Cinderella's forehead, reassuring her that her love would always be with her, even when she was gone. That night, Cinderella's mother passed away quietly in her sleep. The grief that followed was overwhelming. For Cinderella, it felt as though the very ground had shifted beneath her feet. The world, which had once seemed so bright and full of possibility, now felt dark and empty. Her heart ached with a loss that words could not express. The woman who had shaped her entire life, who had been her greatest source of comfort and love, was gone. Cinderella's father, devastated by the loss of his wife, was no better equipped to deal with the pain. He was a man who had always prided himself on his strength and ability to provide for his family, but in the face of such a profound loss, he too was left hollow. The home that had once been filled with laughter now echoed with silence. The air seemed thick with grief, and even the bright sunshine outside seemed dimmed by the sorrow inside. In the weeks that followed, Cinderella and her father tried to keep their lives as normal as possible, though it was clear that nothing could ever be the same. Her father's once easy smile was replaced with a distant expression, his days spent working quietly, with little energy for anything beyond fulfilling the bare necessities of life. Cinderella, though just a young girl, had to step up in ways she never imagined. She became the one to care for the house, taking on responsibilities far beyond her years. In many ways, she tried to fill the void left by her mother, doing everything she could to keep the house in order, though she knew it was an impossible task. Her father, though kind and loving, was often absent in his grief. His deep sorrow clouded his judgment, and he became more and more withdrawn, unable to offer the support Cinderella needed. There were days when he would disappear for hours, wandering through the fields, lost in his thoughts, as if seeking solace in the land that had once brought him peace. It was during these times that Cinderella felt the weight of her loss the most. Though she loved her father dearly, she was now left alone to bear the burden of grief, for her father was no longer the same man who had been her protector and confidant. The village, too, mourned the passing of Cinderella's mother. She had been a beloved figure, known for her kindness and generosity. Neighbors and friends visited the family, offering their condolences, but their words, though well-meaning, did little to ease the pain that hung in the air. No one could truly understand the depth of Cinderella's sorrow, for she had lost not just a mother, but her guide, her role model, and her closest companion. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, Cinderella's father began to consider the idea of remarrying. Though his heart was heavy with grief, he knew that he needed someone to help care for the household, someone to take on the responsibilities his wife had once carried so effortlessly. It was a decision born of necessity rather than desire, but it would prove to be the catalyst for the series of events that would change Cinderella's life forever. In this period of immense grief, Cinderella's life was altered irreversibly. The loss of her mother left a gaping hole in her heart, one that would never fully heal. Yet, despite the sorrow that enveloped her, Cinderella's strength began to emerge. It was through this unimaginable pain that Cinderella would learn the true resilience of the human spirit, setting the stage for the difficult trials she would face in the future. But for now, the grief and sorrow were all-consuming, and her world felt as though it had come to a halt. After the death of Cinderella's mother, her father, though deeply affected by his loss, eventually decided to remarry. He believed that by marrying again, he would provide a better home for Cinderella, someone who could help take care of the household and guide his daughter through the years ahead. It was a decision born out of necessity, as the weight of managing the home and dealing with his own grief had become too much for him to bear alone. But, little did he know, this decision would soon bring a darkness into their lives, one that would overshadow the bright days of Cinderella's past. Her new stepmother, a woman of striking appearance but cold demeanor, arrived with her 2 daughters from a previous marriage. At first, Cinderella's father was hopeful that the new marriage would bring some stability back into their lives, but it soon became clear that his expectations were far from reality. His new wife, though outwardly charming and composed, quickly revealed her true nature as a cruel and manipulative woman. Cinderella's stepmother, from the very beginning, did not see her as part of the family. She viewed Cinderella not as a daughter, but as an obstacle, someone who would take attention away from her own daughters and the life she hoped to build in her new marriage. While Cinderella's father was preoccupied with his work and his grief, the stepmother grew increasingly dominant in the household, using her influence to control every aspect of their lives. Cinderella's once peaceful home had now become a place where cruelty and injustice ruled the day. Her 2 stepsisters, equally spoiled and self-centered, joined their mother in the mistreatment of Cinderella. They were not kind-hearted or gentle like the friends Cinderella had known in her earlier life. Instead, they were both vain and entitled, their world revolving entirely around themselves and their own desires. They would often make cruel remarks about Cinderella's appearance, calling her ugly and mocking her for being too quiet or too gentle. Every day felt like an uphill battle for Cinderella as she was constantly reminded of her inferiority. The atmosphere in the house began to shift dramatically. Where there had once been warmth and love, there was now a constant tension. Cinderella's stepmother would give her impossible chores to do, cleaning the entire house, scrubbing the floors until they shone, washing clothes, and preparing meals for everyone. Her stepsisters, with their high-maintenance demands, would give Cinderella endless tasks, knowing that their mother would allow them to sit idly by and watch. It didn't take long for Cinderella to realize that the only way to avoid her stepmother's wrath was to remain silent and obedient. She would do the chores without complaint, even if it meant working late into the night, alone in the cold and dark. There were no words of praise or encouragement from her stepmother. In fact, any attempt to express her needs or desires was met with sharp reprimands and dismissive glares. Cinderella's stepmother, though she presented a gentle face to her husband, was a master of cruelty behind closed doors. She believed that Cinderella was nothing more than a servant in her own home. Her stepsisters, who were as lazy as they were selfish, would often make fun of Cinderella's appearance, poking fun at her dirty clothes and untidy hair. Whenever they were unhappy about something, they would take their frustrations out on Cinderella, knowing that their mother would never reprimand them. They had been taught to believe that they were entitled to everything, and Cinderella, in their eyes, was beneath them. The stepmother's cruelty grew more pronounced as the days passed. She would deliberately give Cinderella difficult tasks that would take hours to complete, knowing that by the time she was finished, she would be too exhausted to enjoy any rest. On top of the chores, Cinderella was expected to tend to the needs of her stepsisters, running errands, preparing their meals, and ensuring they were always pampered. In return, she received no gratitude, only scorn. Her father, blinded by grief and his own preoccupation with his business, failed to notice the growing mistreatment of Cinderella. He trusted his new wife, believing that she was taking care of everything at home. In his mind, the marriage was helping to stabilize their household, but in reality, it was destroying the peace and happiness that had once been there. Cinderella's loneliness deepened as she found herself distanced not only from her father but from the village as well. She had no one to confide in, no one to offer comfort. The friends she once had, the warm community she had grown up in, seemed like a distant memory. She was isolated in her own home, cut off from the life she had once known. The village, aware of her stepmother's cruelty but too respectful to intervene, remained silent. Cinderella's world had become a prison. There were times when Cinderella would retreat to the garden, her only sanctuary, and sit alone by the large oak tree that had once been a symbol of her family's happiness. She would weep quietly, longing for the days when life had been filled with light and love. But even in those moments of sorrow, she knew that there was no escape. Her stepmother's rules governed every part of her existence, and her stepsisters, ever cruel, kept her in check with their constant demands. Despite all the suffering, Cinderella's spirit remained unbroken. She refused to allow the cruelty of her stepmother and stepsisters to destroy the kindness in her heart. Though they tried to suppress her joy, Cinderella continued to find small moments of peace. She would steal away to the kitchen at night to bake small treats or would sit quietly by the hearth, reading a book or singing to herself, moments that allowed her to hold on to the last remnants of the person she had once been. Her beauty, too, was something that her stepmother tried to diminish. Whenever the family would go out, Cinderella's stepmother would make sure to dress her in the oldest, most ragged clothes, so she would be a stark contrast to her stepsisters, who were always dressed in the finest garments. The cruel woman believed that by diminishing Cinderella's appearance, she could ensure that her daughters would always be seen as the most beautiful. It was a subtle but relentless effort to crush Cinderella's confidence and self-worth. But even in the face of such cruelty, Cinderella's heart remained pure. She did not let the actions of her stepmother and stepsisters break her. Instead, she chose to remain kind, gentle, and loving, knowing that her worth was not defined by her outward appearance or the mistreatment of others. She held on to the hope that, one day, her life would be different, that something would change and she would be able to live a life filled with love and happiness once again. It was in these quiet, solitary moments of resilience that Cinderella's true strength began to emerge. Despite the cruelty that surrounded her, she found a way to endure. But little did she know, a change was coming that would alter the course of her life forever, a change that would offer her a chance to break free from the prison her life had become. The kingdom was abuzz with excitement as the royal palace announced that a grand ball would be held in celebration of the prince's coming of age. It was a grand event that was to take place in the royal palace, a dazzling affair that everyone in the kingdom had been eagerly anticipating. Invitations were sent out to the wealthiest and most influential families, and for many, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to meet the prince and perhaps even secure a marriage proposal. The entire village was alive with gossip, as the ball was the talk of the town for weeks leading up to it. Cinderella, though living in her own personal prison, could not help but dream of what it would be like to attend such a magnificent event. She had always heard stories about the royal palace, about the grand chandeliers that lit up the ballroom, the ornate dresses and sparkling jewels of the women, and the handsome, regal prince who would sweep a lucky lady off her feet. It was a fantasy that Cinderella clung to, even though she knew, deep down, that her life was far from the grandeur of the royal court. The very idea of attending the ball filled Cinderella with both excitement and sorrow. She knew that it was a dream far beyond her reach, given the cruelty of her stepmother and the expectations placed on her at home. But she couldn't help herself. The thought of slipping into a beautiful gown, dancing with princes and nobles, and leaving behind the stifling, oppressive atmosphere of her home was too tempting to ignore. She would close her eyes and imagine herself at the ball, spinning gracefully across the floor in a shimmering gown, the prince's arms around her as the music played. Her stepmother, however, had no intention of letting Cinderella attend the ball. When the royal invitation arrived, bringing with it the opportunity to attend the most extravagant event of the season, her stepmother's cruelty surfaced more prominently than ever. She saw the ball not as a joyous occasion, but as another opportunity to prove her dominance and make Cinderella feel unworthy. Her two stepsisters, equally excited by the prospect of attending the ball, were eager to find the perfect gowns to wear and spend hours preparing themselves for the event. They laughed and giggled as they picked out the finest fabrics and accessories, their minds filled with excitement at the thought of catching the eye of the prince. They were convinced that one of them would be chosen to be his bride, and their thoughts were consumed with the idea of winning the prince's favor. But as they discussed their plans, they showed no concern for Cinderella's feelings. Instead, they mocked her, asking if she would even be allowed to come. Cinderella, though deeply saddened, held her tongue. She could never hope to compete with her stepsisters, who were rich with beauty, status, and all the things that society valued. As much as she longed to go to the ball, she knew that her reality was far different. When the day of the ball finally arrived, Cinderella was left behind with a heavy heart. Her stepmother and stepsisters made it clear that she would not be part of their plans. Her stepmother ordered her to stay home and complete the household chores, just as she had done every day before. She was given an endless list of tasks, ensuring that she would have no time to even think of attending the ball, let alone prepare for it. The stepsisters, dressed in their finest gowns, left Cinderella behind as they proudly made their way to the carriage waiting outside the house. They were giddy with excitement, laughing and chatting, their anticipation bubbling over. Cinderella stood in the doorway, watching them leave with a sense of longing that pierced her heart. She wanted so much to join them, to experience the joy and magic that awaited them at the royal palace, but she knew that her place was not beside them. Once they were gone, Cinderella was left alone in the house. The oppressive silence returned, and she was left to her tasks. She had hoped for even a moment of peace, but as she scrubbed the floors, cooked the meals, and cleaned the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been forgotten, that her dreams had been dashed once again. She longed for the love and attention that her stepsisters received so effortlessly, but she knew that as long as she remained in their shadow, her dreams of a better life would remain unfulfilled. But as Cinderella worked, her heart still clung to the hope that one day she might be able to escape this life of servitude. The royal ball, for all its fantasy, had shown her a glimpse of a world she could never be a part of, but it also reminded her that there was something greater out there, a world where she might be loved and respected, where she could be more than just a servant in her own home. The hours passed slowly, and Cinderella's heart felt heavy with the weight of her dreams. She knew she would never be able to attend the ball, but she still couldn't help but imagine what it would be like. She closed her eyes and pictured herself in a beautiful gown, the kind her stepsisters had chosen, her hair adorned with flowers, walking gracefully into the palace. She could almost hear the music, feel the excitement in the air, and see herself dancing with the prince, spinning under the sparkling chandeliers. But just as Cinderella resigned herself to the reality that the ball would remain nothing more than a dream, an unexpected visitor appeared at the door. Her life was about to change, though she had no way of knowing it yet. For Cinderella, the ball was not the end of her story, but merely the beginning of a journey that would transform her life forever. The night of the royal ball arrived, and Cinderella's heart was heavy with sorrow. Her stepmother and stepsisters were long gone, enjoying the grandeur of the palace while she was left alone at home to finish her chores. The house, once a place of warmth and joy, now felt like a hollow shell of her past happiness. Every corner of it seemed to remind Cinderella of the life she once had, and the life she longed to return to. As Cinderella worked in the quiet, dimly lit kitchen, tears silently fell down her cheeks. She dreamed of the life she had once imagined for herself, dancing in a beautiful gown, being admired by the prince, and escaping the cruel fate her stepfamily had imposed upon her. But the reality was clear. She would never be part of their world. She was nothing more than a servant, left behind while they indulged in luxury and splendor. The clock ticked on, the night growing later and colder. Cinderella's heart ached with a quiet despair, but she still held on to the faintest flicker of hope that someday, somehow, her life would change. Just as she was about to give in to the overwhelming sadness that had settled over her, a soft glow filled the room. It was a light so gentle, so sudden, that it seemed to emanate from nowhere, and yet it felt like it belonged to the very air around her. She froze, unsure of what was happening, her breath caught in her chest. And then, before her very eyes, appeared a figure, a woman, radiant with a warm and kind glow. She was dressed in flowing robes, with a gentle smile on her face and a presence that filled the room with a sense of peace. Cinderella could hardly believe her eyes. She thought she might be dreaming, that the sorrow of the night had finally taken its toll on her mind. But the figure before her was real, and the words that came from her lips were as real as anything Cinderella had ever known. "Do not despair, my dear child," the figure said softly. "I have been watching over you, and I know the depth of your pain. You are a kind and gentle soul, and you deserve more than the cruelty that has been shown to you." Cinderella could only stand there, speechless, overwhelmed by the vision before her. The woman before her smiled kindly, understanding the confusion and wonder in Cinderella's eyes. "I am your fairy godmother," she explained, "and I have come to grant you a wish, one that will help you change the course of your life tonight." At first, Cinderella could not fathom what was happening. How could this woman, this magical being, help her? She had no fine clothes, no way of reaching the ball, and no way of escaping the cruel grip of her stepfamily. But the fairy godmother's eyes sparkled with warmth and compassion as she continued. "I can grant you the opportunity to attend the royal ball, Cinderella," she said, her voice filled with kindness. "You will go to the palace, and you will dance among princes and nobles. But remember, there are conditions. This magic will only last until midnight. At the stroke of 12, everything will return to what it was." Cinderella's heart raced at the thought of attending the ball, of living her dream, if only for a night. But her doubts crept in. How will I ever be able to go? I have nothing to wear, no way to travel there. The fairy godmother smiled, her eyes twinkling with the knowledge of a deeper magic. With a wave of her hand, a golden light swirled around Cinderella, enveloping her in its warmth. The rags that Cinderella had been wearing vanished, replaced by the most exquisite gown she had ever seen. It shimmered with soft blues and silvers, the fabric light and delicate, as if spun from the very stars themselves. Her hair, once untidy and messy, was now beautifully styled, adorned with sparkling jewels. Cinderella stood in awe of the transformation, her breath caught in her throat. But the magic did not stop there. The fairy godmother raised her hands once more, and before Cinderella could even process what was happening, a pumpkin appeared before her, surrounded by mice and rats. With a flick of the fairy godmother's wand, the pumpkin was transformed into a magnificent carriage, its wheels gleaming and its golden accents sparkling in the dim light. The mice became horses, their once humble forms now elegant and strong, ready to carry Cinderella to the palace. "Now, Cinderella," the fairy godmother said, her voice full of warmth, "you must go. But remember, the magic will only last until midnight. At that hour, everything will return to its natural state. You must leave before the clock strikes 12. Cinderella, overwhelmed with joy and disbelief, nodded. She didn't question the strange events that had brought her to this point. The fairy godmother had given her the chance of a lifetime, a chance to experience the ball, to be part of a world that had always seemed so far out of reach. The gown, the carriage, the magic, it was all a dream come true. With a heart full of gratitude and excitement, Cinderella climbed into the carriage, ready to embark on her journey to the royal palace. As the carriage rolled away, Cinderella couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the night. The streets, once dark and empty, were now illuminated by the golden light of the moon. The city looked more magnificent than she had ever imagined, with the royal palace rising in the distance, its towers and turrets sparkling against the night sky. For the first time in years, Cinderella felt a sense of freedom, a sense of possibility that she had long thought was beyond her reach. As she traveled to the palace, Cinderella's mind raced with excitement. She couldn't believe that she was about to live her dream, to be part of the dazzling world of the royal court. She had never felt so alive, so full of hope and joy. The world seemed vast and full of potential, and for that moment, she felt like she belonged in it. The fairy godmother had given Cinderella the chance to experience the life she had always longed for, but it was not just the clothes, the carriage, or the beautiful palace that mattered. It was the chance to be seen for who she truly was, someone deserving of love, respect, and happiness. Cinderella was about to enter a world of wonder, and though she knew it would be brief, she was determined to make the most of the opportunity. Little did she know, the magic that had transformed her night was about to lead her to something even more extraordinary than she had ever dreamed. Cinderella arrived at the royal palace, her heart racing with excitement and awe. As the carriage came to a stop at the grand entrance, she could hardly believe her eyes. The palace, glowing with the light of 1,000 lanterns, was a sight more magnificent than anything she had ever imagined. The marble steps, the gilded gates, the beautiful gardens, everything seemed to sparkle in the moonlight, making it look like something straight out of a fairy tale. Her heart swelled with both wonder and disbelief. She had never thought she would be part of such a world. As Cinderella stepped out of the carriage, her gown shimmering in the light, she was immediately noticed by everyone in the vicinity. The guests, who had been chatting and mingling, paused in mid-conversation, their gazes drawn to the vision before them. Cinderella had transformed into someone unrecognizable, a vision of grace and beauty. Her once dowdy appearance had been replaced by a radiant glow that captured the attention of all those around her. It was as though she were a star among the crowd, standing out in her delicate, ethereal gown. At that moment, Cinderella's heart swelled with a mixture of emotions, joy, awe, and a quiet sadness. She had never imagined that she could feel so beautiful, so admired. For the first time in years, she was free from the weight of her stepmother's cruelty and her stepsister's disdain. Here, in the palace, she could simply be herself, without fear of judgment or ridicule. The feeling was intoxicating. But amidst all the admiration and attention, one person stood out, none other than the prince himself. He had been standing near the grand staircase, greeting his guests with his usual charm, but the moment he laid eyes on Cinderella, everything seemed to stop. His gaze locked onto her, and it was as if time itself slowed. He had seen many beautiful women in his life, but none like her. Cinderella's grace, her elegance, the way she seemed to glow from within, it was unlike anything he had ever experienced. She captivated him instantly. Cinderella, unaware of the prince's gaze, hesitated for just a moment as she entered the ballroom. She had been so caught up in the beauty of her surroundings and the excitement of being there that she hadn't noticed the prince watching her. But as soon as their eyes met, she felt a strange flutter in her chest, an instant connection that left her breathless. She quickly lowered her gaze, feeling self-conscious, unsure of why she was suddenly so nervous. The prince, however, did not look away. He began to make his way toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. His heart was racing, his thoughts clouded by the powerful attraction he felt. He had always imagined the woman he would marry would be someone regal, someone noble, someone of his own world, but what he found in Cinderella was something different. She was not like the others. There was a purity to her, a kindness, and an inner beauty that shone brighter than any outward appearance could. She was the one he had been waiting for, without even realizing it. When he finally reached her, he greeted her with a warm smile, his voice soft and sincere. "Good evening," he said. "I must say, I have never seen anyone quite like you tonight." Cinderella, feeling a bit overwhelmed but touched by his words, curtsied gracefully. "Thank you, Your Highness," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. She was aware of the attention they were now drawing, and it made her even more nervous, but there was something about the prince's presence that put her at ease. He was kind, genuine, and it seemed like he saw her for who she truly was, not just a girl in a beautiful gown, but someone who deserved to be seen and admired. The prince extended his hand toward her, a silent invitation to dance. Cinderella hesitated for a moment, unsure if she was worthy of such attention, but the prince's smile was warm and inviting. Without a second thought, she placed her hand in his, and they began to dance together in the grand ballroom. As they danced, Cinderella felt as though she were floating. The music filled the air, swirling around them, and for a brief moment, she felt like she was part of something magical. The prince's strong hand held hers, guiding her with a grace she had never known, and they moved as one across the floor. It was as though they were the only two people in the entire room, their world shrinking down to just the music, the dance, and the connection they shared. The prince was mesmerized by Cinderella's every move. She danced with a fluidity and grace that left him in awe. He could tell that she was not accustomed to such elegance, yet she carried herself with such poise and beauty that he felt drawn to her like never before. They talked as they danced, getting to know one another, sharing small, intimate details about their lives. Cinderella spoke softly, but her words were filled with kindness and warmth, and the prince couldn't help but be captivated by her gentle nature. For Cinderella, the night was a dream come true. It was as though she had stepped into a world she had only ever imagined, and for a brief moment, she felt like she belonged. She could hardly believe that the prince, so regal, so powerful, was dancing with her, asking her questions and listening to her answers. For the first time in her life, she felt seen and appreciated, not just for her appearance, but for the person she was inside. As the dance continued, Cinderella could feel her heart racing, not from nervousness, but from the deep connection she was forming with the prince. They laughed, they shared stories, and they lost themselves in the music. The ballroom around them seemed to fade away, and the only thing that mattered was the prince and the girl who had caught his heart. It was a love that had bloomed unexpectedly, and yet it felt as though it had been destined all along. But as the night wore on, Cinderella felt the weight of time bearing down on her. The clock on the wall ticked louder and louder, and she knew that the magic would soon come to an end. She couldn't let the prince know the truth, not yet. She couldn't let him find out who she truly was. She wasn't one of the noble ladies in the room. She wasn't from a world of luxury and grandeur. She was just a girl who had been given a brief moment of magic. As the music played on, Cinderella's joy was tempered by the quiet fear that the enchantment would soon break. The prince, oblivious to her inner turmoil, was completely smitten. He had found something extraordinary in Cinderella, and he knew that his feelings for her were unlike anything he had ever known. But little did he know, the clock was ticking down, and Cinderella's time in the palace was quickly running out. The night at the royal ball was nothing short of magical. Cinderella, though her time there had been fleeting, had captured the heart of the prince. The connection they shared during their dance was undeniable. For both of them, it was a moment of pure bliss, a fleeting glimpse into a future they never expected. But as the clock struck midnight, Cinderella's world began to unravel. The magic that had transformed her from a humble servant into a vision of beauty began to fade. With a rush of panic and urgency, Cinderella realized that she had to leave before the magic wore off entirely. She had no choice but to flee the palace, leaving behind the prince, her dreams, and the beautiful life she had experienced, if only for a night. In her haste, she lost one of her glass slippers on the grand staircase. The moment was brief, but the impact would prove to be lasting. Cinderella's heart ached as she fled into the night, her gown slowly turning back into the tattered rags she had worn before. The glittering carriage turned back into a humble pumpkin, and the beautiful horses reverted to the mice and rats they had once been. But despite the loss of her magical transformation, Cinderella could not help but feel a sense of hope. She had experienced the ball, danced with the prince, and felt for the first time in her life that she was truly seen. And though the magic had faded, the prince's love for her had not. The prince, however, was left standing alone in the ballroom, utterly captivated by the mysterious woman who had vanished so suddenly. His heart was torn. He could not forget her, and he knew that he could not rest until he found her. There was something about her, her beauty, her kindness, and the undeniable connection they shared that had stolen his heart. He was certain that she was the one he had been searching for all his life. Determined to find the woman who had captured his heart in such a short time, the prince called upon his trusted servants and gave them an important task: to search the kingdom far and wide for the girl who had left behind the glass slipper. The prince had no idea who she was, but he knew one thing for certain: she was the one he had danced with, and he would stop at nothing to find her. The prince's search began the very next day. He ordered that every young woman in the kingdom try on the slipper, hoping that it would fit the mysterious girl who had left it behind. The glass slipper was a perfect and delicate fit for only one person, and the prince believed that by having every maiden try it on, he would finally find the woman of his dreams. The royal heralds went from village to village, from house to house, carrying with them the delicate glass slipper. Word spread quickly, and soon every young woman in the kingdom was preparing for the prince's arrival. For many, this was an exciting prospect, a chance to meet the prince and perhaps become his bride. But for others, it was a reminder of how far out of reach such a dream could be. Cinderella, though, was not like the others. She had no hopes of the slipper fitting her, nor was she even aware that the prince had set out on a mission to find her. As the days passed, the prince's search continued, and his heart grew heavier with each failed attempt. The glass slipper seemed to fit no one except for one woman who had not yet tried it on. The search was long and exhausting, and the prince's servants visited every home in the kingdom, making sure that no one was left out. But they could not find the woman who had captured the prince's heart. Meanwhile, Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters were eagerly preparing for the arrival of the prince's messengers. They were certain that one of them would be chosen as the prince's bride. They had watched with envy as Cinderella had attended the ball, but they were now determined to win his favor. The stepsisters, though they had no real chance of fitting the glass slipper, were willing to try anything to win the prince's attention. When the royal messengers arrived at Cinderella's home, her stepsisters immediately tried to fit the glass slipper on their feet, convinced that they were the ones the prince had been searching for. But despite their efforts, the slipper was far too small for either of them. Their feet were too large and their heels too wide. The prince's servants, though polite, could see that the slipper did not belong to them, and they were about to leave when Cinderella, who had been quietly watching from the side, stepped forward. The stepmother, realizing that Cinderella had been left unnoticed, quickly tried to push her aside. She was determined to keep Cinderella from being involved in the prince's search, but the servants paid her no attention. They had seen her before at the ball, and they immediately recognized her. With a sense of hope building in their hearts, they gently asked Cinderella to try on the glass slipper. They could hardly believe their eyes as Cinderella slipped her foot into the delicate shoe. It fit her perfectly. In that moment, Cinderella's heart leapt with joy. She had been found. The prince's search was finally over, and she had been the one he had been searching for all along. The servants, overjoyed by the discovery, rushed to inform the prince that they had found the owner of the glass slipper. Cinderella was the one who had captured his heart, and he had no doubt that she was the woman he had danced with at the ball. When the prince arrived at Cinderella's home, his heart was filled with anticipation. He had searched tirelessly for the woman who had stolen his heart, and now, standing before him, was the very person he had been longing to find. The glass slipper, which had seemed like a distant symbol of a fleeting moment, now symbolized the love they shared, and the prince knew without a doubt that Cinderella was the one he was meant to be with. The prince smiled as he knelt before Cinderella, taking her hand in his. "I have been searching for you, my dear," he said softly. "You are the one who stole my heart that night, and I will not let you slip away again." Cinderella, her heart filled with joy and disbelief, smiled back at him. In that moment, all the pain and suffering she had endured melted away. She was no longer a servant in her own home, no longer the forgotten girl in the corner. She was the woman who had captured the prince's heart, and her dreams of a better life were now within reach. The moment the prince knelt before Cinderella, his heart full of love and excitement, everything that had once seemed impossible was finally coming to fruition. The trials and hardships Cinderella had endured, the cruel treatment from her stepmother and stepsisters, all seemed like distant memories in the face of the love and happiness that now awaited her. The glass slipper had been the key to this extraordinary moment, a symbol of their connection, a magical link between the prince and the girl he had met at the ball. With a radiant smile, Cinderella looked into the prince's eyes, her heart swelling with joy. For so long, she had dreamed of this very moment, though she had never truly believed it could come to pass. But here, in front of her, was the prince who had captured her heart, and she knew in that instant that their love was real. It wasn't just the magic of the night or the stunning gown that had brought them together, it was something deeper, a bond that had formed in the short time they had shared at the ball. The prince, his face glowing with happiness, stood and gently took Cinderella's hand. "I have searched for you everywhere, my love," he said, his voice filled with tenderness. "And now that I've found you, I will never let you go. You are the one I've been waiting for." Cinderella, overcome with emotion, could hardly find the words to express the happiness she felt. For so long, she had endured hardship and mistreatment, never imagining that she would be worthy of such love. But now, standing beside the prince, she felt more cherished and adored than she had ever felt in her life. As the prince led her to the carriage that awaited outside, Cinderella's stepsisters and stepmother watched in stunned silence. They had never imagined that the quiet, meek girl they had treated so poorly could be the one to win the prince's heart. But the truth had finally come to light. Cinderella was no longer the servant girl who had been left behind. She was now the woman who had captured the heart of the prince, and nothing could take that away from her. The journey to the palace was a dream for Cinderella, who gazed out of the carriage window at the familiar streets she had once walked with a sense of hopelessness. Now, she was traveling toward her future, toward the life she had always dreamed of but never believed was possible. Her heart swelled with excitement as she thought about the life ahead of her, the love she would share with the prince, and the happiness that awaited her. When they arrived at the royal palace, the prince's parents, the king and queen, welcomed Cinderella with open arms. They could see the love between her and their son, and they were delighted to see him so happy. Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters, though they were invited to the palace, could hardly bear to see the young woman they had so cruelly treated standing by the prince's side. But Cinderella, ever kind and graceful, showed them no ill will. She had learned through her hardships that kindness and love were more powerful than resentment, and she would not let their cruelty spoil her happiness. In the days that followed, Cinderella and the prince spent their time together, growing closer with each passing moment. The bond they shared was stronger than anything either of them had ever known. They were two souls who had found one another in a world full of uncertainty, and their love grew deeper with every conversation, every laugh, every shared moment. Cinderella found joy not only in her love for the prince, but in the newfound freedom and peace she felt in her own heart. Soon, the royal wedding was announced, and the entire kingdom rejoiced. The celebration was grand, and it was a reflection of the love and joy that had blossomed between Cinderella and the prince. The once downtrodden girl, who had been forced to work day and night in her own home, now stood as the princess of the kingdom, surrounded by those who loved her. The ball that had brought her and the prince together was only the beginning of their journey, and the future was full of endless possibilities. The royal wedding was a sight to behold, with flowers everywhere, the air filled with music, and the entire kingdom gathering to celebrate the union of their beloved prince and his beautiful bride. Cinderella wore a stunning gown, fit for a princess, and she felt like the luckiest woman alive. She danced with the prince, surrounded by her new family, friends, and the people who had once looked upon her with pity and disdain. Now, they celebrated her for the kind and compassionate woman she had always been. As the night came to an end, Cinderella and the prince stood together, hand in hand, on the balcony of the royal palace. The stars above twinkled brightly, and the air was warm with the promise of a bright future. The prince gazed at Cinderella, his heart overflowing with love. "You are my everything," he whispered. "I will love you forever." Cinderella, her heart full of joy and peace, smiled up at him. "And I will love you, my prince, for all eternity." The two of them, now united in love, knew that their lives together would be filled with happiness, kindness, and endless love. Cinderella had found her true place in the world, not as a servant, but as a princess, one who was loved, cherished, and valued for who she truly was. And so, Cinderella and the prince lived happily ever after, surrounded by love and warmth in a kingdom where kindness and joy reigned. The trials of her past were nothing more than distant memories, and she had finally found the happiness she had always dreamed of. That's the story of Cinderella. Hopefully this story can help you sleep. Good night.